morning's keynote speaker is Professor Jeff Van de Zande. He has taught in the English division at Delta College for the last 15 years. In that time, he has been instrumental in the development of new courses and programs, including Delta College's Writing Certificate, Technical Writing Certificate, and Advanced Certificate in Digital Film Production. He has also been active in writing and has published a full-length collection of poems and 5 books of fiction, which include the novel American Poet. This novel won the Michigan Notable Book Award from the Library of Michigan. During his tenure at Delta, he has won the Ludo Freville Scholarly Achievement Award and most recently the Berkstein Award for Teaching Excellence. When asked to give any kind of presentation, he writes the presentation out. He then reworks the presentation over and over, often rewriting it 30 or 40 times. Unlike, I can't imagine Jeff doing that. Unlike other keynote presenters, he doesn't really talk to the audience so much as he reads what he has painstakingly written. He is going to do that today. And he did that at Adjunct Academy last night, and it was amazing. So he will try his best to make eye contact with the audience from time to time, but he might forget. He hopes that he won't take too much flack from those in the communications field for his nature of his keynote address. So without further ado, Jeff Van de Zande.
So you can hear me all right? Okay, good. All right, I think I'm ready to get started. First, we'll make sure that this works. I'm not going to do this if you're going to be that negative. And if that's where you are, I'm not going to say anything up here that's going to convince you otherwise. Well, that's what I'm dealing with, I guess. All right. And the Madonna microphone is a little odd, given the fact that I'm going to stare down at this and read, but it does play a part later. All right. When the Fall Learning Days Committee asked me to give today's keynote address, they had some criteria that they wanted me to meet. Of course, I wasn't surprised by this. That is until they started to list off what they wanted. First, they wanted me to be funny, hence the t-shirt. I'd made the mistake of being funny in public on 2 other occasions in the past, and now I'm known as Delta's resident clown. Honestly, it's difficult to be funny. I can be accidentally funny or spontaneously funny, but it's a challenge to be funny by prescription. Like any comedian, I could easily bomb. The committee didn't care about my potential bombing. Be funny, they said. And it wasn't enough that they wanted me to be funny, they wanted me to use irreverent humor. Irreverent means to be deficient in respect, disrespectful, or flippant. There's a big difference between funny and irreverently funny. Funny makes almost everyone laugh. It's mostly harmless. Irreverent humor in this forum makes almost everyone laugh too, but only on their surface. As I'm being irreverent, I can imagine one administrator leaning over to another and saying, "Did you hear him? He said maybe the B in B wing stands for broken." That's really very funny. He's clever, isn't he? With a sharp mind like that, I'm sure he'll enjoy teaching 7 days a week at our new extension site in Bad Ass. I'm gonna get a drink of water here. Irreverent is dangerous. It rides a fine line between funny and offensive. And to be irreverent, you must be disrespectful of something that deserves respect, which means repercussions are always a possibility. Of course, my reference to the B wing was only a hypothetical example of irreverent humor. I'd much more likely say that the B in B wing stands for benevolent, brilliant, brotherly, and beloved. And certainly not black-tempered, belligerent, or brutally retributive. Even after funny and irreverent, the committee wasn't done with their list. They wanted me to be interactive, motivational, inspirational, and to somehow have my presentation come back to sustainability. Oh, they said, your presentation also has to have enough substance to it that it counts towards professional development. I suggested that I give my keynote down by the bay, that way I could walk on water for my grand finale. Honestly, ever since agreeing to do this keynote, I've been going to a therapist. I have him on speed dial. It's helpful even though he has instituted a no calls after 2 a.m. rule. In the end, I did agree to try to meet their criteria. I also have my own personal criteria. I'll be honest, I'm really not a fan of attending keynote addresses. Every fall learning days I come back to campus well-rested and ready to teach. Invariably, it is the keynote address that drains the energy from me. Not the state of the college address. I don't think I could ever sit through another presentation on the characteristics of the millennial student. Worse is the irony of a speaker who would lecture and show PowerPoints for an hour and a half on the urgency of embracing interactive learning. I made up a word to describe how I feel after most keynote addresses. I call it being keynoted, which is akin to being struck repeatedly with a pillow. If such a thing goes on long enough, it still has the effect of leaving you feeling beaten up. My personal criteria is simple. I want my keynote to be useful. I want people to be glad that they attended, and not just because they laughed. I don't want it to be a waste of time. I want it to leave at least a few people thoughtful and looking to the upcoming semester with a different frame of heart and mind. I think more than a few of us need that. There's a fairly simple fact that I want to point out. What we do here at this college is sacred. I'm not talking about the committees we form, or the equipment we order, or the satellite centers we create. Why I waited, I don't know. There they are. I'm talking about the lives into which we bring power. I'm talking about the potential that we turn into action. I'm talking about what we do to give those who might not otherwise have a chance to get educated, a chance to get educated, and everything that means. What we do, it really is a calling, from the administrative level to the support staff level to the faculty level. It has to be a calling, because for many of our students, we are their last best chance. I believe it would be enlightening to have an It's a Wonderful Life moment and get the opportunity to see what our former students' lives would be like had we not had the opportunity to have an impact on them. You might be thinking, they'd be fine. I don't know. Take your own life and then subtract your education from it. Most of you would not be sitting in this room right now. You might be thinking, well, that's a little dramatic. You make it sound like subtracting delta from their lives means subtracting their education. For many of those students, delta was their only shot at a higher education, and thereby their only shot at a much improved life. A life with safer neighborhoods, better health care, more money, better schools for their children. On a grander level, a life after delta is more likely to contribute to society, put science to good use, appreciate the nuances of art, music, and literature, and have opportunities to become self-actualized. Students who come to Delta often don't have the resources to go elsewhere. They don't have the access to the numerous opportunities and fields of study we offer. Quite simply, without us, they don't have the opportunity to very easily change their lives. We make education affordable, accessible, and compassionate. It sounds like a slogan or a mission statement, but it's true. What we do here is big. We can't let the smallness of the mechanisms of the institution get in the way of that. Even though we can't always agree on how the place should operate, we can't let that keep it from operating. We also can't let the frustrating aspects of our students impede us from having the open hearts to want to help them. It seems as though sometimes they are thumbing their noses at the very gift we are trying to give them, the gift they so desperately need. That's part of our job too. Not only to provide the gift, but to help them realize their need of this gift and to accept it, to open it without breaking it or breaking us. I could go on. I could spin out some more heartfelt words. I could make more metaphors about education being a gift or what we do here being a calling. I wouldn't be saying anything new. I think deep down we all know that what we do is important to our students' lives. I think most of us really want to give them our best selves. We just forget sometimes how to do that or how to make it our priority. It's often only in hindsight that we realize how a moment to be better or more aware with a student slips through our fingers. The institutional aspect of the institution wears us all down, wears at our humanity. Honestly, when I really thought about it, what intimidated me the most about giving this keynote was the idea that there had to be substance to it. I really don't have the goods that others have. I can't talk about how technology is going to change the educational landscape in the next 10 or even 5 years. I don't really have that much knowledge on the nature of the brain and how best to help it learn. I really couldn't speak for anything even nearing 20 minutes on things like classroom management or assessment or the best ways to have students work in groups. Back in June, I was asking, what the hell have I gotten myself into? What do I have to say of substance to my colleagues? Well, honestly, I respect very much the intelligence in this room, and this is not in the written part, I'm just thinking this now, that how lucky I am to work here and how very intimidated I am to be speaking up here and that you're courteously listening. My therapist wasn't much help. He said, just because you don't have anything worthwhile to say doesn't mean that you're not a nice person. You're okay. I'm okay. Your inner child is okay. Okay? After days of thinking about it, however, I remembered how I'd been starting my literature classes for the last 5 years. Each day I would bring in a Zen parable from this book. My thought was that the thinking that went into dwelling on a Zen parable was very similar to the thinking that went into dwelling on the meaning of a short story. I thought of the parables as a way to prime the pump, to get my students in touch with the part of their brain that processed metaphor and symbolism. Of course, before I could get very far with the parables, I had to explain to my students that Zen is a philosophy, not a religion. Otherwise, they acted as though I was trying to convert them. I explained that one can be a Zen Christian, a Zen Buddhist, a Zen Muslim, or even a Zen atheist. It's just a philosophy offering an approach to life. It can also offer an approach to students, and so we can be Zen professors, Zen administrators, or Zen support staff. More on that later. I'm not sure whether or not the Zen parables had any effect on my students' ability to discuss literature. I do know, however, that the simple wisdom in the parables had an impact on me. I noticed that while I was under the influence of the parables, I was a better person. I paid more attention. I tried to look at each moment as a gift. Zen implores us to live in the moment, to see that what each moment is asking of us. Zen helps us see that we make life more complicated than it needs to be, that the greatest gifts are really quite simple. A theme that comes up in the parables quite a bit is the importance of seeking out the true self. I really tried to hammer this one home to my students since they are often young enough to use what the parables are trying to teach them. According to Zen philosophy, each of us has a self that we are meant to be. Often that self is in opposition to the selves that others would have us be. From an early age, other voices are filling our heads with the idea of what paths to follow. They are often not the paths for us, but they are very enticing. When we are young, we are most susceptible to those voices and the allure of their paths. As a result, we don't take the time to know our true self. We go to school, We date, we marry, we buy homes, we have children, we choose careers, often making these decisions when we have the least wisdom to make them. We haven't taken the time to know our true self, but that often seems more difficult than simply being the self that others would have us be. It's easy to follow what others would have us do. When we do what others want us to do, there's so much applause. If, however, what we are doing is in conflict with our true selves, these decisions that we made in our youth will come home to roost, often with a vengeance in our 40s. Many people in their 40s find themselves discontented with their careers, with their significant others, with quite simply the choices they made in their youth. The late mythologist Joseph Campbell called this getting to the top of the ladder, looking around and discovering that you've been on the wrong ladder all along. The results of this discontentedness can be bitterness, sadness, desperation, cynicism, or worse, extramarital affairs, addictions, substance abuse. While teaching the parables and teaching literature, I'm often after my students to take the time to really know themselves. Find out what makes them happy or at least fulfilled. Never stop seeking your own path, I implore them. Let's see if we can put that whole thing in. There we go. This is one of the parables. Open your own treasure house. Deju visited the master Basso in China. Basso asked, "What do you seek?" "Enlightenment," replied Deju. "You have your own treasure house. Why do you search outside?" Basso asked. Deju inquired, "Where is my treasure house?" Basso answered, "What you are asking is your treasure house." Deju was enlightened. Ever after, he urged his friends, open your own treasure house and use those treasures. The idea of, and I'm going to explain as best I can, Zen philosophy and enlightenment while wearing this ridiculous. The idea of enlightenment and Zen philosophy can be quite confounding. Enlightenment is a Western translation of the word bodhi, which literally means to have woken up and understood, and refers to the particular form of understanding or knowledge that the Buddha attained upon his awakening. This knowledge is an understanding into the causality by which sentient beings come into existence, as well as the operations of the mind which keep sentient beings imprisoned in craving and suffering. Bodhi is thus the understanding of the way to liberate oneself from this imprisonment. It might be easier and more useful to think of enlightenment, however, as it's often understood from a westernized point of view. In the Western world, the concept of enlightenment has begotten a romantic meaning. It has become synonymous with self-realization and the true self. The true self, in this sense, is regarded as a substantial essence being covered over by social conditioning. In other words, societal pressures and prescriptions can often get in the way of our path to our true self. Approaching it this way has made more sense to my students. They can understand the idea that there is a true self that they were meant to be, and then the many selves that others would have them be. Our misery can come from living out a self that is not true to the self we were meant to discover. And so this parable, open your own treasure house, becomes quite beautiful. It seems at first that Basso is trying to be cryptic with his answer. What he means to say is that the path to enlightenment is an individual and inward journey. When he asks, why do you search outside, he means only to ask, why do you look to others for an answer that only you can discover? The treasure house is the discovery of the true self and the gifts unique to that true self. When Deju asks where he can find his treasure house, again, Basso hits him with an answer that seems not to be an answer. But it is indeed the answer. The very fact that Deju is aware that he has this metaphorical treasure house and wants to find it, that itself is the answer. So many people are willing to have others choose their path for them that they never even bother to ask of their treasure house. Too many of us are driven by forces outside of ourselves. What you are asking is your treasure house. And by that, Basso means that a life devoted to seeking the true self is a life well lived. When it comes to enlightenment, trying to arrive is the arriving. What a rich life he will live on his quest to find his treasure house, his unique gifts, his true path in the world. I like, too, that the parable leaves open the idea that we will be many selves in our lifetime. Our treasure house will change, our true self will evolve. Basso seems to suggest that as long as we keep asking, where is my treasure house? Or what am I meant to do at this age, at this time, in this health? As long as we keep asking that and striving to find authentic answers, we are on the right path. However, even when we are fortunate enough to figure out our own path, there are those who would still insist that what we are doing is wrong. Our folly is when we listen to them, when we begin to doubt our true self, even after we have discovered our unique way through the world. So another parable. Teaching the ultimate. In early times in Japan, bamboo and paper lanterns were used with candles inside. A blind man visiting a friend one night was offered a lantern to carry home with him. I do not need a lantern, he said. Darkness or light is all the same to me. I know you do not need a lantern to find your way, his friend replied, but if you don't have one, someone else may run into you, so you must take it. The blind man started off with the lantern, and before he had walked very far, someone ran squarely into him. Look out where you are going, he exclaimed to the stranger. Can't you see this lantern? Your candle has burned out, brother, replied the stranger. If looked at metaphorically and not literally, this is, I don't know why I'm taking it down. Metaphorically and not literally, this is not the story of a blind man, but the story of all of us. Considering that our goal is enlightenment, or to see the light of our unique path, then in a way we are all born blind, with the goal of using the unique gifts of our treasure house to see our way to our own path. In this parable, the man has already found a way to navigate the world, a way unique to his essence and true self. Arguably, he has found his way home many times that night in the past. Perhaps he relied on other senses. Maybe he heard others coming, or smelled them, or felt their footsteps coming toward him. It's only when a well-meaning friend questions his way that he stumbles on his path. It's this voice, the voice coming from outside of him, that makes him doubt his way. He takes the lantern because his friend insists that he must. Essentially, the man begins to follow another person's way through the darkness of the world, which is not the way to the true self. Using someone else's way dulls him to his unique gifts. He quickly depends on the new way. Overly confident with his lantern in hand, he doesn't use his own gifts. He doesn't listen or smell or feel. The last line of the parable becomes so powerful. Your candle has burned out, brother. That's more than just the candle in the lantern. It's the candle within himself that had allowed him to find a way through the world. It's the candle of the true self, blown out by the voice that would insist that there is a way through the world that works for everyone and must be taken. There is not a way that works for everyone. There is only the way that we find that is right to our true self. We have to find and light our own candle, the candle within. I share these two parables because they have often been the most meaningful to my students, who, if you remember 18 or 19 or 20 years old, there's many voices after you telling you who you should be, what you should do, what you should major in, and they feel that pressure. Our students are under assault by so many voices that come from outside themselves. They are drawn to the idea that there is a path meant for them that only they can blaze. They are also terrified by the idea. It's so much easier to follow a prescription, especially in the face of Zen parables that tell people to find their true selves, and yet never might make it quite clear how anyone is supposed to do that. I did have a student who was very much affected by the parables, in addition to some of the short stories we'd read, like Franz Kafka's The Metamorphosis. I'd had this student in 4 different creative writing courses. His major, however, had nothing to do with creative writing. He was at Delta for a completely different degree. I won't name that major because it is noble in its own way, but it was not the major for him, and he knew it. Of course, he was afraid to tell his parents what he really wanted to do because the occupation that he was pursuing had a long history in his family. The voices all around him were insisting that the occupation in question was right for him because it would bring good pay, many opportunities, and stability. The only voice saying otherwise was his voice within. He'd ignored or suppressed that voice for a long time, but week after week of parables would allow it no longer. I can still remember the day he came into class and said, "Mr. Van, I finally talked to my parents and it went pretty well. I went to SVSU on Friday and enrolled in a double major of creative writing and theater." But he was all done with classes he could take at Delta, so I didn't like him. That's bad. He was practically glowing when he told me, and I like to believe that the glow was coming from his candle within, which had finally been touched by a match. He knew that his new major came with questionable pay, infrequent opportunities, and instability, but he also knew that it was the path for him at that time. Pretty powerful decision for him to make at such a young age. I can't imagine what his life would have been like down the road if he had shoehorned himself into a career that wasn't for him. Living with the regret and doubt of what if can be horrible. That's the kind of impact we can have on our students. For some of them, we provide opportunities for them to find their unique way through the world. We can't ever forget that. For us, it's often a job with pressures, politics, and simply meaningless busy work. It can wear us down. For them, though, it builds them up. It provides a way. For many students, we provide a means for them to discover the path to their true selves. I'm going to shut this off for a moment. Yeah, it's me. Yeah, today is the day. I don't know, I guess. I'm in the middle of it right now. Yeah, they're here, sitting in front of me. No, I'm not going to hang up. They can't hear me. And I don't think it's going well. I just did the treasure house thing. Yeah, the whole true self thing, they hated it. You should see how they're looking at me. That one I told you about, Chris Curtis? I'm pretty sure he's going to beat me up after that. No, they hate the t-shirt too. And the new shoes. I know he said not to go to Kohl's, but they were, whatever. I don't want to keep doing it. It's terrible. No, I'm not doing the mantra either. I hate the mantras. Fine. Most people won't like me, but it's okay to like myself. Most people won't like me, but it's okay to like myself. Most people, you know what? That's not helping at all. No, I don't think I do want to have a chat with my inner child. I'm going to handle this on my own. And for the record, the knickknacks in your office are hideous, jackass. Telemarketer. As I read more parables, I learned that they have something to say about the way we operate at Delta. The writers of the Zen parables were pretty big on the importance of the individual. They were skeptical of the group, and group-made decisions. Maybe some of them had served on committees. They learned about the effectiveness of committees to get something done. Learning to be silent. The pupils of the Tendai school used to study meditation before Zen entered Japan. 4 of them, who were intimate friends, promised one another to observe 7 days of silence. On the first day, all were silent. Their meditation had begun auspiciously. But when night came and the oil lamps were growing dim, one of the pupils could not help exclaiming to a servant, "Fix those lamps." The second pupil was surprised to hear the first one talk. "We are not supposed to say a word," he remarked. "You two are stupid. Why did you talk?" asked the third. "I am the only one who has not talked." Those Zen guys have a good sense of humor. That parable reminds me very much of some committees I've been on. Taking it down. That's not my plan. I'm putting it down. God, but we love committees at Delta College. We love big committees. We love slow committees. We love committees that aren't quite certain what their exact purpose is. I've been on committees that have met multiple times in an effort to find out when is the best time for everyone to meet. I've been on committees that have agreed to meet by email in the name of efficiency, only to watch those committees become dysfunctional because people will type things into an email that they would never say to another person face to face. When I started here, I was overwhelmed at the amount of committees. It was at Delta College that I first heard the phrase ad hoc. I didn't know what the chair of my division was talking about when he told me that someone would like to have me serve on an ad hoc committee. Honestly, I thought it was a code name. I took it as a compliment. This was during the time when our military named things Operation Desert Falcon, Operation Condor, and Operation Eagle Fury. I figured an ad hoc committee was when they put together a crack team of super committee members. The academic equivalent of SEALs. I imagined a group of administrators in camouflage in the B-wing, meeting early in the morning and saying, this one is crucial. It's imperative we get this done right. We need the best committee possible. It is time for us to... As it turns out, ad hoc is Latin and simply means for this, or for this situation. Not nearly as exciting as I originally thought. So ad hoc committees are formed when some situation needs a committee to address it. At Delta College, at any given time, there are 75 to 90 ad hoc committees at work. Laugh, because that can't be the case. It seemed like a ridiculous number. Yep. At Delta College, at any given time, there are 500 to 750 ad hoc committees. Better. In a given year, 2 to 3 of them will actually finish what they've been assigned to do. For new employees, you will know that you are on an ad hoc committee when the only person with any sense of urgency or work ethic is the chair of the committee. More often than not, the chair will end up doing all of the work, and the only thing that will slow the process down will be the speed with which other members respond to, argue about, and scrutinize the chair's work. When asked to be on an ad hoc committee, you will be promised that the work will go quickly. Plan on a 2 to 4 year commitment. If your ad hoc committee's work has to be voted on by the Senate, add an additional 5 years. Under no circumstances are you to agree to be the chair of an ad hoc committee. Agreeing to be the chair of an ad hoc committee is a sure sign of masochism. You might also find yourself on a standing committee. You will know you're on a standing committee if the group meets frequently without any clear idea as to what it's supposed to be doing. Lack of purpose will in no way diminish the sheer number of meetings. Standing committees are also usually comprised of 40 to 50 members, most of whom will be absent from most meetings. Membership on a standing committee is linked to medical problems that result in doctor's visits that can't be rescheduled or can only be scheduled during the time that the committee meets. Membership on a standing committee ends at the time of termination, employee separation, retirement, or untimely death. If you study the Zen parables long enough, you see that they really don't celebrate the efforts of the group very much. There is a significant emphasis on the power of the individual, especially of the individual who explores the gifts within. I'm not saying that there haven't been committees that have done outstanding work. I've also seen ideas improved upon by a talented committee taking a close look. I do, however, wonder if we could trust the individual a little more and not feel like we have to throw a committee at every problem or have a committee scrutinize every innovation. I asked Dr. Goodenow this very question about whether or not Delta might scale back its reliance on the committee system to get things done. She said it was a very interesting question and that she would put together an ad hoc committee to look into it further and benchmark it against what other colleges are doing. She guaranteed me that the committee would have its meeting times worked out by early 2015. Okay, that's probably enough of reference. I'd rather not make the 150-mile round trip drive to Bad Axe and back to Midland every day. Okay, get yourselves ready. There's a microphone for it, because I want some participation. Prior to composing it, as I thought about my keynote, I imagined myself sharing 2 more of my favorite parables. Like the parables I shared earlier, I saw myself giving an explanation as to what I thought they meant, or at least what they mean to me, especially as they relate to interacting with students. And this is what I mean by Zen professor, Zen administrator, Zen support staff. I think, and this is off script too, I think every interaction that we have with students is a moment, like in Zen. And we are given an opportunity every time a student stops in our office door or comes up to us after class. And that moment is asking really of us, if we're in this building, it's asking us, are you being the best you can for the people you're here for in that moment? So if someone comes up after class and says, I really have a question, or I was really interested in what we read or whatever, are you doing this? Quickly, like multitasking, quickly checking, whatever, which is very easy to do, and I'm sure I've done it. Or a student stops in your office and you're half reading an email, half listening to them. Those are moments misspent because the student wants your full attention in that moment, and that is what that moment is asking of you. And that's what Zen asks of you, is to, what is this moment asking of me, and am I responding to its question? Like I said, I saw myself giving an explanation of these parables. Then I realized that that would result in too much of my voice in the room. When I share the parables with my students, I don't simply tell them what I think they mean. I lead a discussion. I give them a chance to think about them. I realize that discussion isn't only about Socratic method, leading them toward inevitable answers. It's about all the voices in the room helping to make sense and meaning. I'm often surprised by what my students find in the parables. Their insights often illuminate my own understanding. This is a funny story. I hope it is. After looking at that parable together, my students have to write a paper on existentialism, and they have to explore one of the short stories through existential philosophy. And because it's very difficult, I assign the paper on the first week and say you'll basically have 14 weeks to write this, and when I read it, I will expect a 14, I'll keep that in mind that you had 14 weeks to write it, and partly you can't write this overnight and so forth. And I hammer that all semester, and we read this thing. And this kid in the back raised his hand and said, Mr. Van, you keep saying we have to start that paper, like we should have started it like 9 weeks ago now. He goes, but maybe that's your way. Maybe that's not my true way to write a paper. I actually stopped and said, that's great. Like, you're using the parables against me as a weapon. It's wonderful. But he saw something in them. And that's why when we have discussions of the parables in class, often the students see something in the parables that I don't see or haven't thought about, and it adds to it. So that's why I would like some people. And I think the nature of this is people could probably just speak. I don't even know if we need the microphones to participate, but I'll put these up in just a second. If I would lead a discussion with my students, why wouldn't I do the same with you? I want to share just 2 more parables, maybe talk briefly about their traditional meaning, but I want to open up discussion because as parables, they are meant to be read symbolically. They are not meant to be taken literally. So there's a meaning beyond whatever is on the surface of the story. And can we in some way connect these parables back to our lives with students? So I'm going to have them both up there so people can respond to either one, and they do fit. Hopefully you're thinking about these, and this is risky. This is like planning that in class, if you've ever had discussion and you think, oh, this discussion will take 20 minutes, that's usually a bad plan. Often it's just crickets. But that won't happen here. Remember earlier, and I was like complimenting you, like, oh, you guys are so intelligent and everything. I'm so lucky to work with you. This is where my luck will not run out. All right. So a cup of tea. Nanin, a Japanese master during the Meiji era, received a university professor who came to inquire about Zen. Nanin served tea. He poured his visitor's cup full and then kept on pouring. The professor watched the overflow until he could no longer restrain himself. It is overfull. No more will go in. Like this cup, Nanan said. You are full of your own opinions and speculations. How can I show you Zen unless you first empty your cup? And then every minute Zen. Zen students are with their masters at least 10 years before they presume to teach others. Nanan was visited by Tenno, who, having passed his decade-long apprenticeship, had become a teacher. The day happened to be rainy, so Tenno wore wooden clogs and carried an umbrella. After greeting him, Nanan remarked, I suppose you left your wooden clogs in the vestibule. I want to know if your umbrella is on the right or left side of the clogs. Tenno, confused, had no instant answer. He realized that he was unable to carry his Zen every minute. He became Nanan's pupil, and he studied 6 more years to accomplish his every minute Zen. And this is the part where I have ludicrous optimism. That people will say, I think I can relate that to teaching students, or the fact that the semester starts in 4 days. I mean, I can say something about them. Obviously, I have thoughts, and I chose these. I mean, they're in this book, and you can still find this, and I think there are 101 of those Zen parables. Some of them are really quite baffling, and some of them are really, in their simplicity, very eye-opening. And I chose these two because I think they do relate to what we do. Especially, I think the first one relates to the beginning of next week. And I think the second one, well, I won't say anything more. So, it's like and I have a pretty good poker face. Like, I can sit up here for a few seconds, and you're not gonna win. I asked you, can you see a way to connect these very symbolic, allegorical parables, and can you say that they connect back to teaching in some kind of way, or how we relate to students?
Yes, I can.
Okay. Now there is a microphone, and I can even shut mine off so we don't have feedback here. But yay, shut up, my.
Thank you. I consider my answer, first of all, to be a place filler, waiting for those of you that are going to come up, more succinct than I, more deeper than I, to come up and to go ahead and give your answer. So that is the role that I'm serving, as your place filler. All right. And so saying that, I think that with the first parable, what that is saying to me is preconceived notions in terms of coming in and having preconceived notions not only about our students on the first day of class. As an administrator, I would say about my colleague, in terms about my colleague administrators and my colleague faculty, as well as colleague support staff, having preconceived notions. So I would say that that first parable is saying to me to empty my cup, and in emptying my cup, I can then receive the value and the wisdom of my colleagues. So I thank you for that. And I hope I've spoken long enough to give you all a chance to think about what you're going to say. Thank you.
I have a story that's really very similar to the first one, a personal story. Early on in my marriage, those of you know my husband Bob, I remember a situation very, very vividly where there was a little bit of lemonade left in a pitcher and I had a cup. And I was absolutely determined to empty the pitcher. So I poured it into the cup and kept pouring and kept pouring, and it came out and I kept pouring because I was so intent. My whole focus was on just emptying that pitcher. And of course that has now become a totally embarrassing story that my husband never lets me forget. But aside from that, I use it now anytime I'm in a conversation with someone and I can see, and particularly my husband, when his eyes start to glaze over, because I am a person of great detail, and I can start to see when I'm like, giving you too much, aren't I? A little bit more than you can chew on. So when I thought of that then, as a teacher, and even anyone in sort of a conversation, there comes a point at which your goal of emptying everything you know into this person at this moment is not the right goal. The right goal is, what can they take? How do you give it to them in such a way that you fill their cup? That's your goal, not emptying your pitcher. So that's good.
Really, that is why you have discussion. I'm doubtful of Socratic method sometimes, because Socratic method has an end that you're trying to get everybody to discuss themselves too. This is open, and we hear things like that that I don't see in that parable, but now I do. Somebody else coming up?
I can relate to both of these parables. I think the cup of tea idea is saying that this is a new year, and so we all have to start with an empty cup, right? And we let our students be the teachers, and they fill us, and they fill us, and they fill us, until we can't put any more in, and then we get to empty the cup and start again in winter, right? And we do this over and over again. It's scary to have an empty cup. If you're ever nervous the first week, you're meeting all these new people, you don't know what to expect. And that shows us that we have to live in every minute Zen, right? Because they're all going to teach us something new. A lot of times we take a lot of pleasure in those super aha moments where you see the student finally, bam, get it? And those are great Zen moments, but if we truly work hard in consciousness and try to make every minute one of those aha moments for our students, then we can work towards every minute Zen.
Renee Hoppy, Lifelong Wellness. The Every Zen, or Every Minute Zen, brings me back to when I was a grad assistant at CMU. And one of my bosses, his name's George Ross, if you've heard of him, I walked into his office and I had to ask him a question. And he took his phone off the hook. And I said, oh, no, it's not that important. I said, what if you get a phone call, it's much more important than me. And he goes, you in my office right now is the most important thing going on. So that was something that I remember and I do for all my students now. So that was a Zen moment, just when someone comes into my office, take that time even though it's outside of class.
Hi, I teach physics, and because so many of the words that we use in physics also have different meanings in the parlance of everyday conversation, force, energy, power, sometimes those are used interchangeably, and students come in with a huge number of preconceptions about the way the basic physics of the world works. And then so I present them some basic concepts on like distance and velocity and speed, and I tell them that they're not deceptively simple looking, that they are inadvertently misleadingly simple looking, and so they're going to have to empty themselves of all these preconceptions. And when I first present the concepts, it might strike them as, oh, that's just so easy. But then I start asking them questions, conceptual questions, and they start realizing, hey, wait a second, there's a whole lot more going on here than I thought. And I like to talk about one experiment that I do with them with a simple pendulum. You just pull the pendulum back and let it go. And I have a 4-part experiment that we work through one piece at a time as a class. Each table has an experimental setup. And before they do the experiment, I have everybody with their clicker make a prediction about what to expect. And so, okay, if we double the mass and pull it back the same distance, is it going to change the amount of time it goes back and forth? Oh, of course it is, because you have to, no, it doesn't. And then I go through 3 things, and the first 3 things, well, the first 2 things don't change things. So, aha, by the 3rd time, you're not going to get me again. This is going to change it. But this isn't going to change it, but it does. And then finally, I do a 4th variation. Aha, okay, this one's going to change it too, and it doesn't. So frequently, all 4 of their predictions about what they then go ahead and measure turn out to be counter to their expectations. And so they have to approach physics with an empty cup, to try to relate it back to their experience, but realizing that the way they've interpreted that and what they've extrapolated from that frequently is not the way that nature really works. And that's what I wanted to add to this.
All right.
So the empty cup is scary. And this made me think of, and I'm sure I saw it on Facebook because I'm on Facebook all the time, but a story about a philosophy professor, of course, philosophy, who brought a jar. I'm sure many of you have seen this story, and it has kind of big rocks in it. So is this jar full? The students say yes, and then puts little pebbles in. Is this jar full? Yes, and puts water in. You know, so maybe our jar doesn't have to be empty, but we just need to see how we can put more.
He's got a reputation for being.
At Howell, I teach communication. This first example parable made me think of the area of listening. When I teach listening, we talk about what constitutes the stages, and you know how we break that down. Academically, there's all these components and parts. But what I try to get across to my students is that when we listen, whether we listen to a stranger or whether we listen to someone whom we know really well, we listen with our cup full of preconceives, constructs that we have about this person, who they are, why they are, what they're doing. If it's a student that's not doing well, we've got constructs in there. And so we start to listen, but we're really listening with our cup full. And so what they add may actually make the cup overflow, but it's overflowing with our preconceives. But if we listen to a person with the cup empty, we give them the opportunity to give us a totally new perception of maybe who they really are and what they're dealing with. And at the end of the conversation, if we let them fill the cup, and we add to it by tell me more, until we finally get it, we're going to look in our cup and the liquid is totally different than it was if we had filled it to begin with. And that's what that made me think of. Think of how that transforms our relationships with people, not just in teaching, but in working across the college. If we just listen to people, waiting for them to fill it with the liquid that they really are.
Humbled to be in a room like with Jeff. We have wonderful people here with wonderful parables. I'm focusing on the Every Minute Zen. It comes at kind of an opportune time. For those of you who are familiar with the work of Dan Gilbert, a Harvard psychologist who writes a lot about happiness, and I've been doing an awful lot of study about happiness over the summer. And Every Minute Zen really strikes me, and I know Zen and happiness aren't the same thing, but that parable strikes me as something that Dan Gilbert continually says. Happiness isn't easy. And a lot of us want to have that moment of, and it hits us, and it doesn't. But being present in the moment and the working for it makes us there. And we need to really be present in the moment and know it's not just going to flow into you, it's the reward of working for the moment and working to be present. Thank you.
The second parable, the Every Minute Zen, reminds me of failure. It reminds me of the failure I feel pretty much every day, you know? You wake up and you're like, oh, I'm always failing. I'm always behind the ball, you know? I'm failing somebody. I'm either failing my husband because he doesn't get any of my time because I'm at Delta College, or I feel like I'm failing my students because I'm in committees and I'm stressed out, or I feel like I'm failing the committee members because I'm teaching my students, or I'm failing, you know? I'm always failing. And I never can remember things because I'm multitasking so much to avoid that failure. And it just reminds me, stop it. I'm good enough. You know what? And if you don't get the reply from me in 5 minutes, which I'm famous for, tough. You know? You'll live, I'm sure. And I'm going to have to. And so, backing up something that my chair, Chris Curtis, said yesterday in our division meeting, he talked about taking more time and, you know, taking breaks, and he said he was going to stop the midnight emails and things like that. I'm going to try too, because I'm tired of feeling like a failure. So I'm going to try to find my every minute zen.
We're getting close on time, so I'm just going to wrap up. The reason, and this is exactly why I brought those in, and that's exactly why I wanted participation, because you said things that I wouldn't have said about them and said very meaningful things. I think a cup of tea for me is just, I think it's asking of all of us to empty our cup for this upcoming semester too, to not take with us the foul liquid that we might be feeling from past semesters, and not to judge the students that are about to come through our door based on the actions of students who left our door, but to empty our cup and leave it open, to optimism, to not let that weigh us down. I think you could really, if you had the time, to bring that parable into class on the first day and talk about students needing to empty their cups. Empty their cup of, I'm not good at English, I'm not good at math, I'm not good at science. All these preconceived notions that they bring that are already making them on a path towards not doing well in your class because they don't think they are good at it. And they're not willing to empty the cup. They carry that old self with them. And the Every Minute Zen, I just think we have that all the time. Clearly 10-0, I think we do this at Delta. We live a number of moments ahead of the moment we're in. We live in the moment of, I got to get to that meeting, I got to answer that email, I got to do this, and we're not in the moment we're in. That's when we miss opportunities to make students feel good about themselves, compliment them, listen to their question, take that phone off the hook or whatever. And I think in this case, 10-0 is excited to talk to his master. He wants to tell him all the students he has or whatever. He's ahead, I want to get in there. And in Zen, if you are truly living in every moment and giving yourself over to that moment, you would remember where you put the umbrella down because it was a deliberate action. You watched yourself. This is really hard to do, and I tell the students, like, Zen is great on paper. Try to do it, though. Literally try to make every action deliberate, to like say, I'm going to be the best umbrella putter downer in this moment. That's what this moment is asking me. But if he was living ahead. And his realization, too, makes it clear how tough it is. He studied 6 more years then, after that little mistake. But I think these are really meaningful for how we interact with students at Delta, and that's why I wanted to bring them in. I'll do this sans glasses. Okay, I nearly forgot to tie this into sustainability. Wait a minute. There's a parable for that. And this one's quick. We won't even discuss it. Because sometimes they're really obvious. A drop of water. A Zen master named Gasan asked a young student to bring him a pail of water to cool his bath. The student brought the water and, after cooling the bath, threw onto the ground the little that was left over. "You dunce," the master scolded him. "Why didn't you give the rest of the water to the plants? What right have you to waste even a drop of water in this temple?" The young student attained Zen in that instant. He changed his name to Tekisu, which means drop of water. I set out with my keynote to meet the criteria of the Fall Learning Days Committee, trying to be funny, irreverent, interactive, inspiring, motivational, worthy of professional development, and somehow relating to sustainability. I also set out with the goal of meeting my own personal criteria, which was to be useful and not a waste of your time. I hope I succeeded in both. Thank you.